The world ended on a Tuesday. Sophia remembers because it was art class, and she had just finished painting a butterfly when the first sirens began to wail across São Paulo. She was 10 years old then, clutching her purple backpack, a birthday gift from her mother, as chaos erupted in the school hallways. Parents rushed to collect their children, faces masked and eyes wide with fear. But for Sophia, that day marked the beginning of a story no child should have to tell. The pandemic swept through the city like wildfire, consuming adults with a ferocity that left the world's children watching helplessly as their universe crumbled. What would you do if you had to watch your world dissolve through a child's eyes? The virus was cruel in its selectivity. While children remained mysteriously immune, adults fell like dominoes. Sophia spent 13 days watching her mother fight, 13 days of holding her mother's hand, reading stories aloud, and promising everything would be okay. But promises don't stop pandemics, do they? On the 14th day, before the fever took her completely, Sophia's mother pressed a small key into her palm. "The purple backpack in my closet," she whispered, "it's yours now. Remember who you are, my butterfly." Those were her last words. The backpack contained survival supplies, a flashlight, batteries, a first aid kit, water purification tablets, and a leather-bound journal. Her mother had been preparing, even as the virus consumed her. But how do you prepare a child for the end of everything? The streets of São Paulo transformed into a wasteland of abandoned cars and empty buildings. The silence was the worst part, a city of 12 million reduced to the whispers of wind through empty streets and the occasional distant cry of another lost child. The government's last act was to establish emergency shelters for the surviving children. Sophia was taken to Shelter 23, a converted school in the heart of the city. Have you ever wondered how quickly civilization can unravel? In the shelter, Sophia watched it happen in real time. 300 children, no adults, and dwindling supplies. The older kids tried to maintain order, but fear has a way of turning even the kindest hearts savage. At night, Sophia would write in her journal by flashlight, documenting the world's end from the perspective of a child who still remembered what it was like to have a mother's embrace. She wrote about the other children's stories. Some had watched entire families die, others had been at school when it happened and never saw their parents again. Each story was different, yet they all ended the same way, alone. The virus didn't just kill people, it killed the future they had promised their children. No more school plays, no more birthday parties, no more tucking in at night. Sophia often found herself staring at family photos on abandoned phones, wondering if this was how the dinosaurs felt when they saw the asteroid coming. But unlike the dinosaurs, the children had to live in the aftermath. What happens to a generation that has to raise itself? As supplies grew scarce and tensions rose in the shelter, Sophia learned her first harsh lesson about survival. Sometimes the greatest threats come from those who are just as scared as you are. But what makes a 10-year-old girl keep fighting when the world has taken everything from her? Perhaps it's the same force that makes flowers grow through concrete, the stubborn, inexplicable will to live, to become something more than just another tragedy in a world full of them. Would you be able to maintain your humanity in a world that had lost its own? This was the question Sophia faced every day, clutching her purple backpack like a lifeline to a past that seemed more like a dream with each passing sunset. The end of the world, she learned, doesn't come with a bang or a whimper. It comes with questions that have no answers, and answers that lead to more questions. The attack on Shelter 23 came without warning. Sophia remembers the taste of ash and panic as flames engulfed the building, raiders seeking the precious supplies they'd hoarded. How quickly safety can turn to chaos. Have you ever had to decide in mere seconds what matters most? For Sophia, it was her purple backpack and the journal inside. Everything else became smoke. Running through the darkened streets of Sao Paulo at 12 years old requires a different kind of courage. The city had become a maze of shadows and silence, where every corner could hide either salvation or destruction. Sophia learned to move like a ghost, to make herself invisible in a world where being seen often meant not surviving another day. The first week alone tested everything she thought she knew about herself. Can a child really understand the weight of complete solitude? The abandoned apartments became her temporary sanctuaries. She developed a system: never stay in one place more than 2 nights, always check for multiple escape routes, and most importantly, stay high above the ground where the desperate hunters rarely ventured. Each new shelter brought its own stories, frozen moments of lives interrupted. Family photos still hung on walls, dishes left unwashed in sinks, toys scattered across children's rooms, all testament to how quickly the world could change. Sophia's survival routine became her anchor to sanity. Dawn meant scavenging, supermarkets first, then pharmacies, always moving in a spiral pattern away from her last safe spot. She mapped the city in her journal, marking dangerous territories and safe zones with different colored pens she'd collected. But what marks the difference between surviving and living? At night, she would write about the people she observed from afar, other children, mostly in groups, some violent, others just as scared as she was. The hardest part wasn't finding food or avoiding dangers, it was fighting the crushing weight of silence. Sophia began talking to herself, creating elaborate stories about the lives that once filled the empty buildings. She gave names to the pigeons that kept her company on high-rise balconies. In her journal, she wrote letters to her mother, telling her about each day's discoveries and challenges. Does loneliness feel different when you're surrounded by a city of ghosts? Learning to read the city became an art form. The direction of scattered trash told her which areas had been recently searched. Fresh graffiti warned of territorial claims. The sound of breaking glass or distant shouts carried messages about which streets to avoid. Sophia became fluent in the language of the abandoned world, but fluency came at a price: the gradual fading of memories from before. Sometimes she would catch her reflection in broken windows and barely recognize the hardened survivor staring back. Every day brought new lessons in adaptation. She learned to judge the safety of water by its smell and color, to tell which canned foods were still good even with faded labels, to move silently through debris-strewn corridors. But can you measure growth when it comes from loss? Sophia's journal entries became shorter, more practical, less about feelings and more about survival. Yet something inside her refused to completely surrender to the harshness of her new reality. Would you be able to find beauty in a world stripped of everything familiar? Sophia did, in the way nature began reclaiming the city, in the sunrise reflecting off empty skyscrapers, in the absolute silence that allowed her to hear her own heartbeat. She was learning that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant keeping part of your soul intact when the world seemed determined to strip it away. Discovery often comes in moments of desperation. On a rain-soaked morning, with her supplies running dangerously low, Sophia found herself pushed into unfamiliar territory. The grand building stood like a forgotten giant, its marble steps leading to massive wooden doors that still bore the faded letters, Biblioteca Municipal. Have you ever felt a building call to you? This one seemed to whisper Sophia's name through its broken windows. The library's vast interior stretched before her like a labyrinth of knowledge, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that pierced through the high windows. Row upon row of books stood in silent attention, their spines a rainbow of faded colors. What secrets can survive the end of the world? Sophia would soon discover that while humanity had crumbled, its stories remained intact, waiting for someone to find them again. Her footsteps echoed through the empty reading rooms as she explored. The children's section, with its small chairs and colorful murals, brought tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in months. But it was the survival section that changed everything: books on foraging, medical care, basic engineering, and agriculture. Sophia realized she had stumbled upon more than just shelter. She had found a university of survival. When was the last time you felt knowledge transform your world? The transformation of the library into her sanctuary began slowly. She cleared a space in the reference section, choosing it for its thick walls and limited entry points. Solar-powered emergency lights still functioned in parts of the building, allowing her to read deep into the night. Each book became a teacher, each page a lesson in survival. She learned about medicinal plants growing through cracks in the sidewalks, how to purify water using nothing but sunlight and plastic bottles, how to create simple machines from abandoned materials. Sophia's journal entries evolved, becoming a blend of practical knowledge and personal growth. "Today I learned how to start a fire without matches," she wrote, "and why Shakespeare wrote about love even when the world was cruel." The library taught her that survival wasn't just about the body, it was about keeping your mind alive too. How do you measure the worth of knowledge in a world where basic survival is a daily struggle? The building itself seemed to protect her, its thick walls muffling the sounds of the dangerous world outside. She created a garden on the roof, using knowledge from agriculture books to grow vegetables in containers salvaged from nearby buildings. The pigeons that nested in the building's eaves became her first companions, then the cats that kept the mice at bay. Slowly, life began to flow back into the silent halls. But knowledge brought its own burden. The more Sophia learned, the more she understood what the world had lost. She spent hours in the history section, reading about civilizations that had risen and fallen, wondering if humanity would rise again. Can hope survive in books when it seems to have died everywhere else? Each night, she added to her growing collection of notes, creating her own guidebook for surviving in this new world. The library became more than a shelter, it became a bridge between what was lost and what could be. Sophia found herself marking passages that spoke to her, creating a paper trail of humanity's greatest thoughts and achievements. Would these words mean anything to the next generation of survivors? She began copying important information into blank books, preparing for a future she couldn't see but felt compelled to protect. In the silence of the library, surrounded by centuries of human knowledge, Sophia discovered that sometimes the greatest act of survival is preserving what others have forgotten. The storm that night was unlike any Sophia had experienced since the world ended. Rain lashed against the library windows, wind howling through the empty streets like a mournful chorus. It was on nights like these that the loneliness felt most acute, when the vastness of the empty city seemed to close in around her. But fate, it seems, had other plans. Have you ever noticed how life-changing moments often arrive unannounced? The cry was barely audible at first, almost lost in the storm's fury. Sophia froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the makeshift weapon she kept nearby. Was it the wind playing tricks, or something more? The sound came again, unmistakably human this time, young and frightened. What would you do if helping others meant risking everything you'd built? Heart-pounding, Sophia crept towards the library's entrance. Through the rain-streaked windows, she saw them, two small figures huddled in the alcove, seeking shelter from the deluge. Brothers, she realized, the older one no more than 8, desperately trying to comfort his sobbing younger sibling. The sight stirred something in Sophia she thought long buried: compassion, yes, but also a deep, aching reminder of her own lost family. Opening the door meant more than just letting in two strangers, it meant letting in the unpredictability of human connection. Sophia hesitated, her hand on the heavy door handle. In that moment, she stood at a crossroads, Continue the solitary existence she'd carved out for herself, or risk it all for the chance to help others? What makes us choose humanity in a world that seems to have abandoned it? The boy's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and hope as Sophia appeared before them. "I'm Sophia," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Come inside." The words felt foreign on her tongue, an invitation she never thought she'd extend again. As the brothers stepped into the library's vast entryway, Sophia felt the world shift beneath her feet. She was no longer just surviving, she was responsible for others. Miguel and Tiago, the brothers introduced themselves between chattering teeth and wary glances. Their story tumbled out in fragments, separated from their group during a scavenging mission, lost in the unfamiliar part of the city, caught in the storm. Sophia listened, realizing with each word how much she had missed human voices, human stories. But could she trust them? More importantly, could she trust herself to care again? That first night was a delicate dance of caution and compassion. Sophia shared her food and blankets, watching as the brothers slowly relaxed in the safety of the library. She found herself explaining her setup, showing them her rooftop garden and the books that had become her lifeline. "When was the last time you saw the world through fresh eyes?" Their wonder at her creation reminded Sophia of all she had accomplished. As days turned into weeks, Sophia discovered that teaching others brought its own rewards. She guided Miguel and Tiago through her carefully organized knowledge, watching as they absorbed survival skills with the quick adaptability of youth. The library, once her solitary domain, now echoed with whispered reading sessions and excited discoveries. But with this new dynamic came new challenges. How do you balance self-preservation with the need to protect others? The brothers brought more than just company, they brought a reminder of the world's fragility. Sophia found herself lying awake at night, listening to their steady breathing, acutely aware of the responsibility she had taken on. Her journal entries became reflections on leadership, on the weight of decisions that affected more than just herself. "Is this how parents feel?" she wrote one night, the question hanging in the air unanswered. In Miguel and Tiago, Sophia rediscovered pieces of herself she thought lost forever, the ability to laugh, to dream, to hope for more than just survival. But with hope came fear, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of opening her heart only to have it broken again. Can you truly protect yourself while caring for others? As Sophia watched the brothers sleeping peacefully in their makeshift beds, she realized that the greatest risk in this new world might not be death, but the courage to live fully once more. Transformation is rarely a single moment, it's a series of small changes that build upon each other until suddenly, you look around and realize everything is different. The library's evolution from Sophia's solitary sanctuary to a thriving refuge for lost children happened so gradually that she barely noticed it at first. How does a place of quiet contemplation become a beacon of hope for an entire generation? Word spreads quickly in a world where survivors are few and far between. After Miguel and Tiago, others came, first in trickles, then in small groups. Children of all ages, each carrying their own stories of loss and survival. Sophia found herself becoming more than just a protector, she was a teacher, a leader, a surrogate parent to a growing family of the lost and found. What does it mean to rebuild society when you're barely old enough to remember how it used to work? The library's transformation was both physical and spiritual. Bookshelves were repurposed into sleeping quarters, reading nooks became classrooms, and the grand atrium served as a communal gathering space. Sophia's carefully cultivated rooftop garden expanded across multiple levels, a green oasis in the concrete jungle below. But more than the physical changes, it was the return of laughter, of shared meals, of whispered stories after dark that truly brought the building back to life. Can a place have a soul? If so, the libraries was reawakening with each new arrival. Leadership, Sophia discovered, was a burden she had never prepared for. Every decision carried weight: how to allocate resources, who to send on scavenging missions, how to mediate conflicts between children who had known nothing but survival for so long. Her journal became a mix of logistics, philosophical musings, and late-night doubts. "Am I doing the right thing?" she often wrote, the question hanging unanswered in the dim light of her solar lamp. Education became the cornerstone of their new society. Sophia drew upon the library's vast resources to create a curriculum that balanced practical survival skills with broader knowledge. Children learned to purify water alongside studying world history, to forage for edible plants while exploring classic literature. "We're not just surviving," Sophia told them, "we're preserving humanity's knowledge for whatever comes next." But what does education mean in a world where the old rules no longer apply? As their numbers grew, so did the challenges. Food and medical supplies were constant concerns, requiring increasingly daring scavenging missions into the far reaches of the city. Sophia organized patrols, created early warning systems, and established strict protocols for dealing with outsiders. The library had to be both a haven and a fortress, open to those in need but protected from those who might exploit their vulnerability. How do you balance compassion with caution when every stranger could be either a friend or a threat? Nights were the hardest. After the younger children were asleep, Sophia would often find the older ones gathered in quiet corners, sharing memories of the world before. She listened to their stories, of parents and siblings lost, of homes abandoned, of dreams interrupted. In those moments, Sophia felt the full weight of her responsibility. These children looked to her not just for safety, but for hope. Could she provide that when her own heart still ached with loss? Yet amidst the challenges, there were moments of pure joy that reminded Sophia why they fought so hard to survive. The first successful harvest from their expanded gardens. The day they got the old generator working, bringing light to the library's grand halls. The impromptu talent show where children sang songs half-remembered from a world that no longer existed. These were the moments that fueled their determination, that proved life could flourish even in the most unlikely places. As Sophia stood on the library's roof one evening, watching the sun set over the overgrown city, she reflected on how far they'd come. From a solitary survivor to the heart of a growing community, she had found purpose in the most unexpected place. The library was more than just a refuge now, it was a promise to the future, a declaration that humanity would endure. But as she looked out at the sprawling, silent metropolis beyond their walls, Sophia couldn't help but wonder, were there others out there, building their own refuges? And what would happen when their worlds eventually collided? 1 year. 365 days of triumphs and setbacks, of growth and loss, of a community forged in the crucible of a world reborn. Sophia stood on the library's roof, her gaze sweeping over the transformed landscape. The once silent city now hummed with life, albeit a different kind than before. Nature had reclaimed much of São Paulo, vines creeping up skyscrapers, trees breaking through abandoned streets. But amidst this wild resurgence, the library stood as a beacon of human resilience. How does one measure progress when the very definition of civilization has changed? Inside, the grand halls echoed with the sounds of children learning, playing, and working together. What began as a handful of lost souls had grown into a thriving society of over 100 young survivors. Sophia, now 14, found herself at the center of it all, a reluctant leader whose every decision shaped their collective future. The weight of responsibility sometimes threatened to overwhelm her, but she drew strength from the trust in the eyes of those who looked to her for guidance. Can a child truly bear the burden of rebuilding a world? the community had developed its own rhythms and rituals. Dawn saw scavenging teams departing, armed with knowledge gleaned from countless books on urban foraging and self-defense. The rooftop gardens flourished, providing a sustainable food source supplemented by carefully planned expeditions to the overgrown parks and abandoned greenhouses of the city. In the afternoons, classes covered everything from practical survival skills to art, literature, and science. Sophia insisted on preserving knowledge beyond mere survival, believing that to truly rebuild, they needed to remember the best of what humanity had been. But how do you balance the immediate needs of survival with the long-term goal of cultural preservation? Evenings were for community. Gatherings in the main atrium became a nightly tradition, with stories shared, songs sung, and plans made. It was during these times that Sophia felt the true power of what they had created, not just a refuge, but a family bound by shared experiences and hope for the future. Yet even in these moments of unity, she couldn't shake the nagging question, were they alone in their efforts to rebuild? The journal Sophia had started as a solitary girl had become a collective chronicle. Children took turns recording their experiences, their fears, and their dreams. Reading through its pages, Sophia marveled at the resilience of the human spirit. Entries ranged from practical observations about crop yields to philosophical musings on the nature of society. One particularly poignant entry from a 10-year-old simply read, "Today I remembered how to laugh." Isn't it strange how the simplest things can become profound in the face of adversity? Challenges remained, of course. Resources were finite, and the city, while vast, would not sustain them forever. Sophia and her council of older children had begun discussing the possibility of establishing contact with other potential survivor groups. The risks were enormous, but so were the potential benefits. Could they trust outsiders after everything they'd been through? The debate raged, with valid points on both sides. Sophia found herself torn between the safety of isolation and the promise of a wider community. As she pondered these questions, Sophia often returned to the lessons she had learned from the countless books surrounding her. History was full of societies that rose from the ashes of catastrophe, of people who found strength in unity when all seemed lost. Perhaps their small community was not so different from those ancient pioneers, carving out a future from the remnants of the past. But what shape would that future take? The greatest change, Sophia reflected, was not in the world around them but in themselves. Children who had arrived broken and afraid now stood tall, confident in their abilities and their place in this new world. They had become more than survivors, they were the seeds of a new civilization, carrying within them the knowledge and values of the old world combined with the adaptability and resilience forged by their experiences. What kind of society would grow from these seeds? As night fell on the anniversary of her arrival at the library, Sophia gathered the community for a special meeting. Standing before them, she felt a surge of pride and hope. "We've come so far," she began, her voice carrying through the hushed atrium. "But our journey is just beginning. The world out there is vast and unknown, full of challenges we can't yet imagine. But I believe that together, we can face anything. We are not just survivors anymore. We are the future." The cheers that erupted were deafening, a sound of pure joy and determination that seemed to shake the very foundations of the library. In that moment, Sophia knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The world had ended, yes, but from its ashes, something new and beautiful was rising. And they would be the ones to shape it. As the celebration continued around her, Sophia slipped away to add one final entry to her journal. "Today," she wrote, "I realized that the end of the world was just the beginning of our story." What chapters would they write next? Sophia's journey from a lone survivor to the leader of a thriving community reflects the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Her story prompts us to consider several profound questions about society, leadership, and the essence of humanity. Firstly, it challenges us to think about the nature of civilization. What truly defines a society? Is it our technological advancements, our institutions, or something more fundamental? Perhaps our ability to come together, to care for one another, and to preserve knowledge for future generations? Sophia and her community, starting from nothing but books and determination, remind us that the core of civilization lies in our connections to each other and our collective will to move forward. The evolution of Sophia's role from survivor to leader raises important questions about leadership in times of crisis. How does one lead when there are no precedents to follow? Sophia's approach, balancing compassion with pragmatism, and individual needs with collective survival, demonstrates that effective leadership often emerges from necessity rather than traditional power structures. It challenges us to reconsider our notions of authority and governance, especially in times of radical change. The central role of the library in this post-apocalyptic world serves as a powerful metaphor for the importance of knowledge and education in rebuilding society. It suggests that our greatest strength as a species lies not in our physical infrastructure but in our accumulated wisdom and our ability to pass it on. This raises questions about what knowledge we value as a society and how we choose to preserve and transmit it. Moreover, the story forces us to confront the delicate balance between isolation and connection. The decision to seek out other survivors highlights the tension between the safety of the known and the potential benefits and risks of engaging with the wider world. It's a dilemma that resonates with our own global challenges. How do we maintain our distinct communities while also fostering the connections necessary for collective progress? Perhaps most poignantly, Sophia's narrative invites us to reflect on the nature of hope and resilience. In a world stripped of everything familiar, these children found the strength not just to survive, but to dream of a better future. It challenges us to consider, what gives us hope in our darkest moments? How do we maintain our humanity when faced with inhuman circumstances? Ultimately, this story is a testament to the indomitable human spirit and our capacity for renewal. It suggests that even in the face of catastrophic loss, there is the potential for rebirth and growth. It reminds us that civilization is not just something we inherit, but something we actively create and recreate through our choices and actions every day. As we reflect on Sophia's world, we're prompted to look at our own with fresh eyes. What aspects of our society do we take for granted? What would we fight to preserve if everything else were lost? And perhaps most importantly, how can we nurture the kind of resilience, compassion, and forward-thinking leadership that Sophia embodies in our own communities today?